Sure. A DDoS or distributed denial of service attack is when you have a threat actor try to overload a resource on your network, and they do so in a distributed manner. Denial of service means that you have a service which somebody is trying to deny. It speaks for itself. You may have a web service where you're having web access coming from users across the world, and they're trying to deny that service to your users. It could be happening in different manners. You could be denying the service by overloading somebody's pipe or their bandwidth by having lots of different connections happen to the point where you overload their connections and their networking. Or you could potentially also overload their systems by trying to hit a system in a certain way that makes it so the computations get overloaded. I would say that DDoS is a moderate threat to most organizations which have a web presence. As long as you properly prepare for a DDoS attack, then there isn't going to be too much threat to your organization. Generally speaking, a DDoS attack is going to threaten your availability. And so if you think to your CIA triad, you have confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Availability is your systems being accessible to those who use those systems. And a DDoS attack is going to take away that accessibility from your systems. One of the, I'd say, positive things about DDoS is it's very expensive for the attacker to perform a DDoS attack. They need to have something like a botnet or something which is distributed where they can attack you and clog up your bandwidth, your computation. And from their perspective, they can only do that for so long before ISPs and or your defenses will eventually kick in and make it to where the attack is no longer effective. And also, it's going to take a fair bit of time and resource for them to make that attack happen. And so while if the attack does happen, there's a fair bit of threat that comes along with it. They're not that common, and with the proper architecture, you can make it to where they're not that much of a threat to your environment. There are a few different ways you can mitigate DDoS. So going back to my explanation of what a DDoS is, there's different ways the DDoS attack can happen. From a networking perspective, you can have your bandwidth overloaded. And so the different ways you can protect against bandwidth overload are, one is having a CDN or a content distribution network in front of your resources. It's basically a proxy that's going to be protecting you from that first hop of the attacker attacking your systems. The CDN will sit in the middle, and usually they'll have lots of bandwidth, and they'll have the ability to shift bandwidth between different infrastructure in their environment. And as a result, if there is a DDoS attack, they can help mitigate it on their side. If you don't have the luxury of having a CDN in front, another thing you can do is have something like a web application firewall or a WAF, or you can have additional bandwidth. And these are two ways where, one, you can either deny the traffic, or you can make it to where you have more traffic than your attackers do. The WAF and the CDN can also protect applications and application servers against having their computation overloaded. If you have a vulnerability or something of that nature on your servers, which is going to leave a venue of attack or be an attack vector for a DDoS attack, then having these protections in between can make it to where those attacks can be blocked by that protection, whether it's the WAF or the CDN. I've been very lucky at the organizations I've been at. We've never had a prolonged DDoS attack. We've had to deal with some of the after effects of DDoS attacks. It's not too uncommon to see some of the more popular CDNs, such as Amazon CloudFront or Akamai, go down because of really large DDoS attacks. But those attacks are generally fairly short and don't have a very large impact on availability. Where I've probably seen the most isn't necessarily a DDoS attack, but an actual denial of service or DOS attack. And usually it's not on purpose. It's going to be somebody configuring a system internally, not rate limiting it properly, and then having it hit your systems too hard to the point where you DOS yourself. And ultimately, the best thing you can do there is, use best coding practice, make sure that you have good change management, and make sure that you test out on a non-production environment before putting those types of things into production. If you are somebody has felt, or let me just start that again. If you have a system or a service that a threat actor feels is necessary to attack with the DDoS attack, then you hopefully have a good architecture built out that will have protections built in from DDoS. Even the best of architectures can still be susceptible to some downtime or some loss of availability from a DDoS attack. And that's almost always what you'll see from a DDoS attack is a lack of availability of services. They're trying to deny your service, right? And that loss of availability can be very detrimental for some organizations. Depending on how your service level agreements are for your service, how much uptime you're trying to meet, then that downtime can be very expensive. There's services out there where a minute of downtime can cost them tens of thousands of dollars. So DDoS attacks can be very expensive for organizations. I would say that DDoS vulnerabilities get tested with the rest of vulnerabilities. Part of it will be making sure that when you build your initial architecture for your application or your platform, that you build an architecture that is hardened against DDoS attacks. There are plenty of tools out there, whether it's the CDNs, web application firewalls, IPS IDS, that you can put in place to help stem a DDoS attack from happening. Another is going to be vulnerabilities in your software code as written by your developers or in your operational infrastructure. And you have to make sure that you have good vulnerability management practices on both sides of the house. As while you're not necessarily testing just for DDoS, you're testing for all the OWASP type attacks, it is possible to have vulnerabilities that make a DDoS attack quite easy on your infrastructure. Log4j, one of the transmutations of Log4j vulnerability that came out recently was that at first they can gain access, they can get command and conquer of your systems, but then the second after that patch, there was another vulnerability found where they could effectively denial of service your system or DOS attack your system by filling up your logs. And making sure that you have a good grasp of the different applications and the different operating systems and code within your environment, and having good vulnerability management systems allows you to see when these vulnerabilities are present and either patch them or put in mitigations in place.